For the longest time, Titanfall has been painted as the next major first-person shooter. When Titanfall 1 was originally released in 2014, it was marketed as the Call of Duty killer. When Titanfall 2 was released 2 years later, it was supposed to sell over 10 million copies, according to Electronic Arts. However, this game has really failed to catch on with the mainstream audience, which begs the question, is there a hope for Titanfall? But before we can really discuss that, let's look at the series so far. Titanfall 1 was created by Respawn Entertainment, spearheaded by Jason West and Vince Sapella, the two minds behind the Modern Warfare franchise, after they were fired from Activision for breaches of contract and subordination. 38 of the 48 people that were either terminated or left Infinity Ward after they were fired joined them to work at Respawn. So what you had at this point was a group of extremely talented people. Modern Warfare 2 alone, which was the last game that many of these people worked on, grossed over $1 billion in revenue. And this talent really showed when the critic scores and the awards started coming out for this game. The Metacritic score of this game was 86%, which is considered very solid. They also won 60 awards at E3 2013 alone, including Best in Show, Best Original Game, Best Console Game, Best PC Game, Best Action Game, and Best Online Multiplayer. And they went on to win Best in Show from IGN, Destructoid, Game Informer, and EGM. However, they only managed to sell 4.2 million copies, meaning that they were outsold by GTA 5, Advanced Warfare, and FIFA on single consoles alone. Now, I'm not talking about their combined sales against Titanfall's combined sales. I'm talking about these games' performance on single consoles compared to Titanfall's overall sales. Titanfall's sales performance was really odd because it was praised by so many people. One of the praises that's been given to Titanfall was that it revolutionized the ways that shooters were played. No shooter at the time really had wall jumping and jetpacking in the way that Titanfall had, and these movement mechanics have been copied by Call of Duty and other franchises since then because of how it completely changed competitive shooters. Gameplay is no longer bound by walls and terrain because you can just jump around and climb over it, and even though many people complain about it in other games, it was something completely new at the time. Titan mechanics were also something that greatly changed gameplay. Titans really didn't rely on a score streak and was something that everybody eventually got. It gave you something else to do than just run around and shoot at people from one or two levels, because once you got into a Titan, the map design completely changed from your perspective. Things that players could take advantage of and move around were no longer accessible by Titan. Instead of using specific walls or windows as cover, they were using entire buildings, which completely changed the way that a lot of these maps were designed. And overall, it was just an extremely well-built game. There was a couple technical issues at the start, but most people had flawless experiences, which is very unique for a lot of games these days that come out broken or hugely flawed for months after release. However, this game isn't completely flawless. Outside of the generation challenges, there was nothing that really pushed people forward. The limited number of weapons, attachments, and perks made it so that there wasn't a level that you're really working towards in order to get to your perfect level playstyle. And the guns were also strangely balanced. The Kraber and other sniper rifles really didn't have a purpose. They were usable, but the game favored fast and close quarters combat rather than shooting people from afar, which made it difficult to justify things like bullet drops and slow scoping speeds, because players can close a huge distance in so little time that it makes it really hard to use these weapons. The other thing is that the car beat the R97 in most cases. Both of these guns were completely usable, but the car was more of a direct upgrade to the R97 than really a unique gun. I mean, both guns felt so similar, but the car just had slightly better stats. The Spitfire LMG was really hard to find useful because it was so sluggish and hard to use in close quarters, which every other gun seemed to excel in. The Smart Pistol was a rage machine because it was overpowered for the longest time. If you got behind somebody and was slightly above them, it was basically an instant kill for you because the other person didn't see you first and didn't have any time to react. And what all this did is made it so that there's realistically 4 viable guns within the entire game. And those 4 guns are the R101C, the car, the Smart Pistol, and the EVA 8 shotgun. All these weapons prefer short range combat, which made the game reflect that. There wasn't really a reason to do anything other than a run and gun play style because the best guns really in the game all favored that close quarters combat. The other problem that there was a lack of competitive support. For the first month, there was no private matches, and even after that, they were just in beta. And this could have driven competitive communities away, because when they looked at this game and saw that there was no private matches, it makes it hard to scrimmage or practice or really get to know this game, except from public lobbies, which probably made a lot of communities kind of turn away from this game. So in order to combat that lack of competitive support, they added rank chips, which ranked players by performance, but did so extremely poorly. The feature itself just felt really tacked on and didn't serve much of a purpose, because there was really no reward or consequence from either using the chips or not. And I have to give it credit, because it was an attempt to fix something that was a major flaw with this game, but it was just really far out there and just didn't work. And one of the largest issues was that there was a lack of a true single player campaign. There's a small amount of lore, but it was very basic. The campaign of this game consisted of normal multiplayer matches with an extra cutscene tacked on to the beginning and the end, and it was very basic as far as campaigns go. I think this really turned a lot of people that aren't big into multiplayer and prefer more single player games off, because there really wasn't a true single player campaign experience, and it felt very rushed overall. The final thing was that the DLC was a complete joke. The DLC was bought by very few people, and it split up an already fragile player base. Within the first month of the release, a lot of the community kind of fell off, and so it had this very small player base, and when they started releasing all this DLC, it split that player base up into smaller and smaller groups, which really hurt this game, to the point that they ended up releasing the DLC for free a year after release, which made it pointless to buy it in the first place. So obviously there was quite a few problems that kept Titanfall 1 from really becoming a mainstream game, and it took a lot of these concerns and fixed them in Titanfall 2. Titanfall 2 should have really been called Titanfall 1.5, or the game they should have released 2 years before. The game didn't differ extremely from the original game, but looked mostly like an improvement of the original title. They added more weapons with a varied playstyle, and now weapons were balanced enough to allow players to do different things than just run and gun. Burn cards were replaced with static boosts that could be selected by the player. Many of the boosts were overlapped with burn cards, but in a more useful manner. Burn cards were overwhelming and useless because that there were so many of them. When you have a deck of 52 cards and you only really want a few of them over and over again, it makes more sense to just have static boosts from the start. There was also more and more varied special abilities, which were lacking from the first title. There's only a handful of abilities that were really useful in the original Titanfall, and Titanfall 2 expanded on this a lot and made a lot of different playstyles more viable. And they also fixed the lack of meaningful progression through merit points. In most games, you level up by getting experience points through just playing the game. However, in Titanfall, you got merit points, which were completely different. Merit points were earned by unlocking challenges, leveling up your guns, and just doing well in the game. And after so many, you would go up to the next level. And it was easier to unlock these merit points by playing with new weapons and play styles, which urged the players to change up what they do instead of using the same gun over and over again and doing consistently well. They took the Titans and gave them a little bit more character by kind of theming them a little bit and personalizing them a little bit more than just giving them one different ability and a slightly different looking frame. And one of the biggest things that they did is the game came with a full single player campaign, which gave most of the stuff in the multiplayer a lot more character and fullness. This game felt a lot more like Call of Duty and Battlefield than a random deathmatch game, because the game was themed and set up quite differently and was based off of an actual campaign and story than just a little bit of lore. These improvements were received extremely well. The Metacritic score from this game ranged between 86 and 89% depending on the platform, and critics generally had favorable opinions of this game, and it was nominated for a lot of awards, but unfortunately only won Game Critics Award for Best Online Multiplayer. However, this game was still beat out by Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. One of the problems was that it was released between the two games and within a week or so of 2 or 3 other major titles, which killed sales. When you're being released between 2 major titles, it's really hard to convince people to play your game, because when you're talking about, do you want to play Titanfall or do you want to play Call of Duty or Battlefield, people are more likely to go towards those major games. And because of all of this, it only sold 2.6 million copies, which is significantly less than even the previous title. However, it holds a lot stronger player base than the previous game. Most of the player base of Titanfall 1 jumped off around a month after release, but this game still holds a decent population overall. So really this begs the question, is there a hope for Titanfall? So this is kind of really two questions that answer the same thing. So first of all, is there a hope for another Titanfall? And really this is a dumb question because the developers have already said they intend on making a third Titanfall, which secures its near future. However, the distant future really depends on that next game. If it succeeds, then there's most likely going to be another Titanfall. However, if it flops, then there's a strong chance that the Titanfall series dies with it. So the other question is that is there a hope for a mainstream Titanfall, like a Titanfall that gets the success that it's been hoping for all this time? And the answer to that is really maybe. There's a chance that a third or fourth game in the series could be a massive hit. If you think about it, Call of Duty wasn't a huge household name really until Call of Duty 4. So there are games that have waited longer than 2 or 3 releases before they really caught on. And the number next to the game doesn't really hold back its success at all. And the other thing that is really positive is that Titanfall 2 was a direct improvement from the first game. And even though it sold less, the player retention is still a lot stronger from the first game, which that leftover player base means that there's still an interest in the game, which means that there are still potential buyers of the next game. However, is the hope for a mainstream Titanfall really likely? It's really hard to say at this point, but I think it's not very probable. Titanfall 2's sales were still a lot lower than the original title, and even after the bad release date, it failed to still pick up steam. There was never a point where the sales kind of continued normally and grew. It just kind of stayed the same at its very low state. And the other problem is that modern military first-person shooter games are not as powerful as they once were, as the industry has become decentralized over time from a single trend. Over the years, the industry has grown and diversified so that there's no single genre that is still dominant anymore. And because of this, it's really hard for a game just being within a genre to get really huge success. And the thing that hurts it is that Titanfall doesn't really have the name protection that Call of Duty and Battlefield have. No matter what happens to the industry, Call of Duty and Battlefield will always probably sell well because they have already a large established player base. And the other problem is that a lot of people have lost interest in the Titanfall franchise. The first 2 games have removed a lot of interest that they've had in the series, and it might stop them from buying a third or fourth or fifth game just because of that complete loss of interest from the disappointment of the first 2 titles. And I think the largest problem behind Titanfall's future is that for the level of support and power of the people that are behind it, its future doesn't really look promising. We have Electronic Arts, which is one of the largest businesses in the industry promoting it, and it's being made by the people that started one of the largest franchises in history. And so really what you have is this game being developed in essentially the perfect conditions to succeed. I mean, you have such a huge publisher promoting it and such a creative pool creating it. And so if really it can't succeed in this environment, it's hard to argue that they have a fighting chance. Even though games have come out of the blue and dominated, when you have essentially like a perfect condition for growing this title, if it can't succeed within the first 2 or 3 titles, I don't think it will ever really succeed. However, only time will really tell the fate of the Titanfall series. There's still a chance that the game could potentially break through, but there's a strong chance that it won't. Maybe Titanfall 3 will be the next biggest game, but possibly not. Until then, we'll just have to keep guessing.